Hello everyone, and welcome back. I'm the Lunar Librarian. I know I've been gone for a bit, but I'm back, and today I'll be covering another story from the Wild West. It's been a while since I've done one of these, but today I have the case of Burt Alvord, a deputy sheriff turned armed robber who led his own gang of outlaws, escaped prison numerous times, and ultimately disappeared into Central America without a trace. So if you're interested in hearing about one of the Wild West's most interesting outlaws, then keep watching. This is the story of Burt Alvord. Burt was born on September 11th, 1867 in Plumas County, California. Burt's father, Charles Alvord, was a New York-born prospector and machinist working for numerous mining companies, an occupation which required Burt and his family to move frequently. Alvord spent his early childhood moving from mining town to mining town throughout the American Southwest. Eventually, Charles decided to settle down, moving his family to Pima County, Arizona in 1879, although they soon moved again to Tombstone, Arizona that same year, after a promising silver vein was discovered in the town, providing a more permanent job opportunity for Charles. Moving to Tombstone would ultimately have a profound impact on Burt Alvord. Tombstone, located in Cochise County, Arizona, is a town some viewers have possibly heard of already. It has been made famous by the gunfight at the OK Corral in 1881, a shootout between Sheriff Wyatt Earp and a group of cattle thieves that has cemented itself as one of the most notorious events in the history of the American West. The gunfight at the OK Corral was not, by any means, the only violence Tombstone saw, however. Indeed, in the early 1880s, violence was an everyday reality of Tombstone. In addition to being a mining town, the city was a haven for smugglers and armed robbers that earned a reputation for lawlessness in the late 19th century. During the 1880s, the Mexican government levied considerable taxes on the sale of alcohol and tobacco. Alongside these goods, stolen cattle were frequently sold in Mexico rather than the United States as well, since it was legally safer than attempting to sell them in the country they had been stolen. Smugglers willing to bring these goods across the border could earn a considerable profit doing so. Tombstone, which is fairly close to the Mexican border, made an ideal place for these smugglers to base their operations in the United States. As a result, Tombstone saw numerous criminals make their home in the town, with most of them spending heavily at the various bars inside the city. Several bars and gambling halls appeared to serve the demands of Tombstone's illicit upper class, institutions which were notorious for brawls, drunken shootouts, and general disorder. It was among this atmosphere of lawlessness where Burt Alvord spent his adolescent years. While his father worked at the mine, Burt spent his teenage years drinking heavily, getting involved in numerous bar fights, and rubbing shoulders with the same smugglers and thieves that populated Tombstone until 1886, when he decided at age 19 to pursue a career in law enforcement. It is not particularly clear why Burt Alvord decided to become a sheriff's deputy. He had been no stranger to public service, with his father serving as an elected official in several towns they had lived in previously. Perhaps the young Burt felt a genuine desire to combat the lawlessness he observed in Tombstone. Perhaps he wanted the power and respect that came with a badge. Whatever the reason, Burt Alvord became a deputy of Sheriff John Slaughter, who was willing to overlook his history of drunken transgressions. However, Burt Alvord was never an exceptionally good deputy. Burt was described as a selfish, short-sighted man who liked to drink to excess. Alvord was a Cochise County deputy from 1886 to 1889, when his alcoholism became increasingly pronounced. In 1889, Burt seemed to fall back into his old ways. He once again started frequenting bars, gambling, and associating with known criminals. When Sheriff Slaughter reprimanded him for this behavior, Burt Alvord resigned as a deputy sheriff entirely. After resigning, Burt moved out of Tombstone, drifting throughout Arizona for several years. He worked as a lawman in numerous towns throughout the territory, including Fairbank and Pierce, before moving back to Cochise County in 1896. After moving back to Cochise, Burt Alvord married a woman named Lola Ochoa, purchased a ranch, and attempted to settle down into married life. He also returned to his previous position as a Cochise County deputy. Burt's life seemed to be going well until 1898, when Burt's father Charles died. This loss seemed to affect Burt in a profound way. He once again fell into the habit of heavy drinking that had plagued him throughout his life. A year after his father's death, in December 1899, Burt would inexplicably resign his post as a deputy sheriff. Just days after he turned in his badge, Burt left his wife. He never gave any reason why he decided to leave the life he had spent 3 years building, but whatever his reasons, Burt Alvord decided in 1899 that he needed to make a considerable change. After leaving his wife and resigning as a deputy, Burt Alvord decided that breaking the law was more lucrative than upholding it. Burt made contact with Billy Stiles, Bill Downing, and Jack Dunlop, men he had previously encountered during his career as a lawman. Burt formed a gang with these former adversaries, and the 4 men began committing armed robberies together. Sometime in January of 1900, Burt's gang recruited a man named Juan Yoas. These 5 men engaged in a series of stagecoach and train robberies throughout Arizona. On February 15, 1900, the gang had planned a train robbery, the kind they had performed numerous times together over the last month. This robbery, however, would not go as Alvord and his associates had planned. The robbery resulted in a shootout between the Alvord gang and Arizona lawmen, in which Yoas was injured and Jack Dunlop was killed. Undeterred by the death of their associate, the Alvord gang continued robbing trains, stagecoaches, and ranches throughout the Arizona territory. At some point in 1900, Burt Alvord would be arrested for the first time in his criminal career and taken to Tombstone to await trial. However, while waiting for his trial, his associate Bill Downing injured the deputy on duty and allowed Alvord, along with 24 other men held in the Tombstone jail, to escape. Burt and his gang continued their crime spree throughout 1901. However, Alvord and his associates ultimately fell victim to the same trends that afflicted other notorious outlaws. By 1902, the Arizona Territory was not as untamed and lawless as it had been when Alvord was a child. Towns had become more populated, sheriffs had more deputies on their payroll, and civilian auxiliary agencies, like the Arizona Rangers, who were founded in March of 1901, had sprung up across the Southwest. As a result, while armed robbery and livestock theft had flourished in the late 1800s, the 20th century made these professions considerably more difficult. Alvord was not completely ignorant of these trends. On April 22, 1902, Alvord struck a deal with Burton Mossman, the captain of the Arizona Rangers, to assist him in capturing the infamous bandit Augustin Chacon. Mossman would collaborate with the gang for several months to capture the notorious robber. The plan was for Alvord to become associated with Chacon, infiltrating his social circle and earning his trust. Alvord went undercover against Chacon for 5 months, until September 4th, 1902, when Burt delivered him directly to Mossman, in a handoff that he considered to be anticlimactic. However, after delivering Chacon, Alvord decided that he didn't want to surrender after all. Instead, he fled from Mossman almost immediately after delivering Chacon. Instead of surrendering to the Arizona Rangers, Burt Alvord decided to return to his career of armed robbery. But Mossman did not take being cheated lightly. After watching Chacon executed on September 21st, 1902, Mossman turned the Arizona Rangers' focus towards Alvord. Despite being pursued by the Rangers, Alvord continued to rob stagecoaches until December of 1903, when himself and his gang were captured. But Alvord was not yet finished with his criminal pursuits. Himself, alongside Billy Stiles, managed to escape prison for the second time in Burt's career. The pair fled custody and went to Mexico, hoping to escape the jurisdiction of the Arizona Rangers entirely. To cover their tracks, Alvord and Stiles even made a crude attempt at faking their deaths. The pair sent the bodies of 2 unknown Mexican men to Tombstone, with a note claiming the bodies to belong to Alvord and Stiles. This ruse convinced absolutely no one, and instead irritated Mossman and the Rangers further. In February 1904, an insulted Mossman ordered the Rangers to cross the Mexican border in order to capture Alvord and Stiles, finding the pair near the town of Naco. Initially, the outlaws resisted, but after a shootout with the Rangers in which both men were injured, the duo surrendered and were arrested, taken back to Arizona, and imprisoned in Yuma Territorial Prison. Somehow, Burt Alvord served only 2 years for his numerous crimes. The circumstances which led to his release are unclear. Possibly he served his sentence through labor. Yuma Territorial Prison was certainly no stranger to employing prisoners as construction workers. It also could have been a legal loophole or a favor Alvord called in from his time in law enforcement. Whatever the reason, Burt Alvord was a free man after only 2 years in prison. After his release in 1906, Alvord decided to leave the United States again. This time, deciding to get even more distance between himself and Arizona, Alvord traveled to Texas, where he caught a ride on a ship heading for Central America. He was last seen working on the Panama Canal in 1910, but after this his whereabouts are completely unknown. Burt Alvord is a unique figure among the outlaws of the Wild West. Burt lived on both sides of the law, acting as both a deputy and a highwayman at different points in his career, all before disappearing completely after serving only 2 years in prison, following a crime spree that involved dozens of armed robberies and several gunfights with sheriffs, Arizona Rangers, and civilian posses. Burt Alvord is not the most famous outlaw of the American West, but he is perhaps among the most interesting. I've been the Lunar Librarian, and if you're still watching, then thank you. If you have any thoughts about this video, or suggestions for any cases you want to see in the future, feel free to let me know in the comments below. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.